things happen that suddenly are large bursts of movement across one corridor. But actually, the number of people moving has gone up quite gradually. And that's something I struggle with all the time because I also have the perception that we're living in this age of mobility, and the numbers just don't tell us that. But I think we're heading towards it. Okay, and so that's kind of what I want to suggest about today is that I think we aren't yet there, but I think we're likely to see a lot more mobility coming in the future. And you can test me on this, we'll talk in 5 years, and you can tell me whether I was entirely wrong on this or not, but I think this is true. The world is actually getting old very quickly. And it depends where you live, how evident this is. 2.1 is considered replacement rate, right? If an average woman has 2.1 children, that's assuming mortality, right? That there's some people who die before they get to adulthood. 2.1 is replacement rate. So when a society has 2.1 births, then the population maintains itself. If it had more than that, which has been most of human history, right? I mean, if you go back into that, right, and lots of children died in infancy, so you had lots of kids. Royal societies where hands mattered, not exactly a lot of a democratic decision making in the households, right? I mean, you had situations where people had lots of children. This has been changing for a long time. It's been changing in the most developed countries first. Urbanization, doesn't matter to have as many kids, is a big part of it. Children aren't dying as much as before. Good thing, very good thing. But also people they're not betting on whether I'm going to have a number of kids. I figure a couple of them might die, I need to have more. Well, you could be much more certain, depending where you live, but much more certain in the past. Very good things. That when you have children, they're likely to survive. That's a good thing. And women have more decision making about whether they want to have children than at a different moment in time. And women decide, maybe, I want a career. Maybe I want to do something else. I'm not going to be at home. Different societies, different patterns, but we're seeing this converge almost everywhere. This is the world. Okay, I'll show you country breakdowns in a minute. We're now at 2.2. This means the world population is still increasing, but not by much. And what you can see is it's dropping quickly. And pretty soon we're going to get below 2.1 at a global level. We're going to reach peak population. We still got another generation, possibly 2 generations, but we're going to reach peak population and start to decline. But some of these countries are really going to be hitting a point where they're worried about things like who's going to take care of grandma, right? I mean, who's going to take care of the elderly population? Not a machine, probably, right? You can have a monitor, but you don't really want a machine taking care of grandma. So there's some things which you need people. What other problem happens when you have an old population? You don't want to venture a guess. It's not only who's going to do the work, but
it's the extra.
On the what?
On your biscuits, when you have aging population that aging out of work.
Then you got to work, right? And most countries who have some degree of pensions, working people are the ones who pay taxes. If suddenly you have an aging population where an increasing proportion of the population is out of the working age and a smaller number of people working, you have a smaller tax base. The people in this room are the ones who are paying the taxes, right? Except for, us who will eventually age out. But the people who are in the younger, in their 20s and 30s and 40s are the ones in 50s still, probably 60s. Now, again, there's some things you can do about this. You can have a later retirement age. This is the huge debate in France, whether you have to work beyond 62. They decided 64. I think they pushed that through. Most countries, the US, I think we went from 65 to 67. I mean, you're going to see some of this. And also, as people become slightly healthier in some countries, they also want to work longer. But that only gets you so far. Ultimately, immigration is going to be a piece of figuring this out. So these are, what I'm showing you here, are the highly developed countries. This is the biggest issue for people in highly developed countries. And you get down, is the U.S. on this chart? It's somewhere on there, probably. U.S. is not on here, but the U.S. should be on here. It's a little further below. Canada's on there, most of East Asia, Japan, Korea, Taiwan. The Gulf states are getting there, and almost all of Europe actually is getting there. So highly developed countries, it's happening first. They're more urbanized, much more likely to have 2 working households, better healthcare, therefore children live longer. All the things that lead to this actually have changed. But look at the upper middle income countries. Now, this is kind of surprising because some of these countries actually And they got cut up at the top and the bottom. But these are countries that are not necessarily wealthy. Brazil is on there, Colombia is on there, Malaysia, Turkey is on there. These are countries that have started to actually lose population absent immigration. Now, like I keep saying absent immigration because that's the key. Not all these countries are actually losing population yet, but they will eventually be losing population. South Africa is not on there, but I can tell you that South Africa is at about 2.3 children per woman. So just above replacement rate. Still a ways to go, still a few years to go, but actually South Africa will get there as well. Not all of these, it is not just a question of wealthy countries. It is a question, South Africa's on the next one, you'll see it. But you see here, I mean, Malaysia is not a well, it's an upper middle income country, it's doing well, but also is now in a place where it's not having a replacement population. And then you wonder, where are people coming from? That actually, is China somewhere on one way? Or China is actually on the top, but it's missing. China's on it. Origin countries need to think about who are the workers, that might actually be able to work abroad. Some countries have done this. Bangladesh and the Philippines, for example, Bangladesh is another country with still high fertility rate. Where Philippines is not though, but Philippines started doing this a while back, which is they started to build sectors where they knew part of the population would go abroad. So healthcare is one. But they've also trained people to work in agriculture and other places, to work in the tourism industry, to learn languages of potential host countries, right? Assuming that some of those people, for example, you train someone to work in tourism in Bangladesh and they speak some Spanish or Portuguese because they might be Malay or German, some percentage of them will eventually be recruited to go abroad, but some percentage will stay and work in your tourism industry. And actually what they've learned will make them is an investment in human capital that's good for the domestic economy. So thinking of things that allow people to move, to actually be mobile, but also allow to upgrade the human capital in your own country to be a win-win. And there's the Japanese are very into this. The Japanese actually do a lot of work with the 4 or 5 countries from which they recruit, where they work on what they call upskilling of people in those countries. They train them, but always with the idea that some of those people will come to Japan and some will actually stay in their country. And they'll stay because life imposes itself, right? You've gone through a year course on hospitality, but you want to get married and you don't really want to leave, or you just had a kid, or your mom is ill, and people stay. So you're looking at people that might be able to move, but you're also training people in sectors for people to stay. Yeah, but origin countries also need to think, how do you make sure that the people who have an opportunity to leave, whether it's circular workers, how do you make sure that they can invest in what they earn? People who leave permanently, though, also, how do you maintain a relationship with them? And hopefully think about, because many of these people want to invest, they may not care about investing in the country, but they'll care about investing in their family or their hometown, right? And so what incentives do you create also that allow people to return? What incentives do you create that allow people to invest? How do you take advantage? Because otherwise, this moment which is coming, unless I'm wrong, this moment, which is, I think, is coming, where you're going to see lots of mobility and people moving, could be a story of the best and the brightest leaving, right? Huge need to think about recruitment processes. Recruitment, as many of you know, I'm sure have studied this, how people get recruited for jobs today is often quite opaque and informal. There are no perfect recruitment systems, and we haven't really seen any yet out there. But thinking about how people match willing workers and willing jobs across borders is a big question, and this is going to be a bigger part of our future. We should figure it out. Right? A lot of this is always word of mouth, but the more opaque it is, the more abuses there are. Right? The more chances of people being promised a job that doesn't exist, or promised conditions that are not true on the other end. And so thinking of how recruitment happens, technology is helpful here, but is not a full replacement for forms of regulation and vigilance. And finally, there's a lot of questions in a mobile world. If you're the country, if you're the origin country from which people are leaving, how do you get people to return that you want to return once they've actually earned some money, or at least reinvest? How do you keep in touch with people? And some countries have done this really well, others have not. But this notion of, some countries like India and Nigeria spend a lot of time on this, Moldova, and simply, the developed countries and the mostly developed countries begin to cull off a lot of the most, entrepreneurial and well-educated people. But if that's the case, if you're the source country, you're losing some of those folks. How do you make sure that they stay connected and they remain part of the development process? So again, I'm not saying any of this is going to be, no one's going to be sitting down in rooms like this, hashing this out, and then in a rational way going, oh, this is the design. This is going to be a much more contentious process, but things that we need to be thinking about, because I think we're actually starting to head into an age of much more accelerated mobility.